I want to ask you sort of some historical type questions regarding the CIA before we get into some recent headlines,
Mhm.
and that is how today would you describe the raison d'être for the CIA? Why do they exist?
The CIA exists because no one has been successful in reforming it since the Church Committee tried a couple decades ago, and of course ruined Church's career and scared all of Congress from touching the CIA. The CIA desperately needs to be reformed. It's out of control. It's a global juggernaut. It abuses secrecy. It's been responsible for the death of some 7 million people in all of its coups, most of which failed. It continues to manipulate Congress. It manipulates the office of the president and the judiciary through things like the state secrets privilege. It is way out of control, but that all started in the National Security Act of 1947, which gave the CIA kind of a carte blanche authority for blanket covert operations. And then National Security Directive 10-2 in 1948 gave the CIA complete open authority for covert operations, assassinations, propaganda, economic warfare, the whole thing, as long as it gave the U.S. government the doctrine of plausible deniability. In other words, as long as the government could say that the White House could say they didn't do it, the CIA could do anything it wanted. That continues today. And they're still doing that today. And of course, I've seen them do that on the inside. And under a constitutional government, that's got to be stopped. And so I'm working together with Bobby Kennedy Jr. and others to put together a plan to restructure the CIA and remove its covert operational authority because the abuses of that have just been beyond the pale.
Was there ever a time when the CIA had a noble cause, fulfilled its obligations? I mean, either the CIA or going back to the Office of Strategic Services, its precursor.
Well, back during the height of the Cold War, initially with the Office of Strategic Services, it did. And when I was on William Casey's staff as one of his protective agents, William Casey was one of the heroic OSS agents that penetrated the Third Reich. It's when the CIA was created as its own global agency in 1947 by Harry Truman. From that very start, the CIA became bad. And within 2 years, Truman himself wrote an op ed saying that he was concerned now what he'd created. And his words, the CIA was casting a shadow on our historic position of freedom because CIA Director Alan Dulles was already smuggling Nazi scientists into the United States from the beginning. Then they proceeded to MK Ultra, and it just got worse and worse and worse. Several failed coups. Iran, 450,000 people died in Indonesia, and on it went. And that has not changed. They still have that covert authority. They still have the authority to conduct, or the mechanism to conduct operations without the knowledge of Congress, including the intelligence committees. They are way out of control.
So let's dive into some fairly recent headlines. I think will provide some fertile ground to sort of expand this discussion. And I want to talk about Mark Zuckerberg because the last time you were on the podcast, we talked about Operation Mockingbird. You talk about it in your new book, Twilight of the Shadow Government: How Transparency Will Kill the Deep State. And of course, Zuckerberg on Rogan admitted that Facebook suppressed key stories under the advisement from the FBI, raising concerns about collusion between tech giants and government agencies. Do you believe the FBI and other intel agencies are now extensions of the shadow government, using big tech as a tool for propaganda? I mean, the FBI, but also I think, the CIA.
Absolutely, without question. For example, CIA InQtel, which is the so-called investment arm of the CIA for technology, has been responsible for the founding of 200 Silicon Valley companies and 300 Silicon Valley companies that are classified. Of course, they were instrumental in the beginning of Google Earth. Facebook, as a matter of fact, had several former CI officers working for it. Whether they're still there or not, I don't know, but they certainly did, and they probably are. And that's just something to think about. Although I laud Zuckerberg's comments, but there's no question about it. The CIA has kind of very concerningly created a new directorate called the Directorate of Digital Innovation, where they are starting to implement chat BT like AI, which will be used for offensive purposes. You can count on it, maybe even within the domestic United States, along with the FBI. We're at a critical mass here with government overreach especially in that regard. And now with the director of digital innovation and InQtel and the CIA having its hooks all through social media and all through Silicon Valley, it is not going to get better. It's going to get worse unless we do something about it.
Mark Zuckerberg seems repentant. Are you buying it, or is he basically just, I don't know, throwing shade?
Well, I liked what he had to say, and kind of it was the first real view of Zuckerberg, the person, kind of being himself. And Rogan has a way of bringing that out of people, which I really appreciate. Uh, uh, he seemed sincere to me, and I was an expert in reading body language, and that's not always perfect, about 80% of the time. He seemed honest to me, and it was frankly a magnificent turnaround. And he made a couple of important comments. One, and he's made this in other interviews, is that and it raised some eyebrows that he wants to improve the masculinity in Facebook before after what it has been. And what happened is diversity, equity, and inclusion got into Facebook like it did the CIA and the FBI and others, and dumbed it down because it was no longer a meritocracy. It was based on certain demographics they wanted to put in places to even things out. And I think Zuckerberg for sure saw that in Facebook, and that's what he meant by more masculinity. In other words, they're not going to discriminate against white male engineers anymore like they had in the past. I saw that in the agency. So it's encouraging. Zuckerberg's comments are very encouraging to me. Remember, though, Facebook has as members of its staff, several former CI officers. Is there ever such thing as a former CI officer? People say, well, I'm certainly one of them because they tried to erase me, but a lot of times, no, they're not forward. I mean, they're kind of bound for life. So I'm very encouraged by Zuckerberg's interview, but as always, I have one eye open. But I thought it was pretty positive.
How important is social media and controlling social media to uh, as a mechanism for the deep state slash CIA?
It's number one. It's at the top. Social media controls the CI is a deceit and propaganda organization that's part of the National Security Directive of 1948 that it would engage in propaganda. And propaganda is what the CIA does and is very good at sometimes and very bad at others. So social media is the propaganda outlet of our generation, of our century. So that's why InQtel is starting up all these social media startups and Silicon Valley companies to get their hooks in there in the beginning. And if you remember, there was a program that Microsoft, Facebook, Twitter, the Digital Information Initiative. I'm sorry, it's called the Trusted Information Initiative and excuse me, Trusted News Initiative. That was signed off on by let me just read this so I get this right. Washington Post, AP, UPI, Google, Facebook, Twitter, they all signed a censorship agreement with the CIA that they would not publish certain information that the CIA disapproved of. That happened, and they signed it. And so the CIA got its hooks in with the TIA right then and still has that. And they will push that and continue to push that. So, yes, the CIA will use and is using social media for disinformation. And hence the screaming calls by the FBI to Zuckerberg and Facebook, and the FBI and the CI, in terms of intelligence, counterintelligence, are joined at the hip. They work together. And a lot of times the Justice Department carries out the CIA's targeting of whistleblowers. So it's gone way out of control, and we have got to, all of us, keep our eyes open because the CIA will continue to use social media as it has with the Trusted News Initiative and others, and they will increase it because propaganda is what they do. That's their charter. That's why they were created. And as Mike Pompeo said when he left, he was and he kind of sadly went native when he put a hit on Julian Assange, which was sad to see. But he did say that he regretted not doing the reforms he should have, which he should have. But he told Bobby Kennedy Jr. this, that the upper 20% of the CIA, they do not believe in democracy and they do not believe in the U.S. Constitution. They believe in world control. That is what the CIA is all about. That's why it's been such an expansive global juggernaut, which it still is today.
So that's the ratio. It's the 20% at the top, but the 80% in the field
Yeah.
or working a desk job and so forth, they are not corrupt. It's the
The
20%
other
at the
80,
top.
yeah, that's right. The other 80% are good American patriotic people. Most of them, they're just doing their job. They believe that they're serving their country and they're supporting their families. There's a lot of very good people in there at the lower levels. At the upper levels, we all talk about this cabal, this secret team, as Fletcher Prouty stated. Who are these elites that are controlling all these abominable coups? Well, that's the upper percent of the CIA. And when I was on CIA Director William Casey's staff, one of my posts was in his house, another one was in his just outside his office, and traveling with him around the world with the other agents. So we were with him all the time. We had no idea that Casey was involved, with the exception of Iran Contra. We were right in the middle of that. We had no idea the other operations that Director Casey was involved in because of the compartmentalization of the whole thing. And they had blown up a girls' school, killed 64 women and girls because they picked the wrong imam and detonated the bomb too early. And Casey was meeting with the Saudi prince to engage in that operation while we sat in his command post in his house and drove around in his cars. So these operations like this are known just to a handful at the top of the agency, and sometimes even above that. And it known only to a few, and that's how the agency has managed to survive, is to keep this stuff tightly controlled by their abuse of their power of secrecy.
So what's in it for the top 20%? Are they just incredibly rich? Is this about money laundering? How do they benefit?
That's a really great question. I'll give you an example. Frank Wisner, who started and operated Operation Mockingbird and many other programs the CIA was doing back then. Frank Wisner committed suicide because he went mad. He was a full born psychological narcissist who loved his power, his control. And I know this too from you walk into a place with millions of dollars, you own that little country, that little town, whatever, like especially in Vietnam. If you're a psychopathic narcissist, which most of these people at the top are, I know I sat right next to them, they love what they're doing. They think that they're the pinnacle of human mental evolution and they're above everybody. They really believe that. Not all of them, but some of them are just basically mentally sick. They're narcissists. They have no faith, no belief in anything other than their own power.
Hmm. And so, I mean, do they have, I don't know, secret numbered bank accounts in Switzerland, worth tens of billions of dollars?
Yes. Yes, in the book Twilight of the Shadow Government, we kind of open up the private financial network of the CIA that not even Congress knows about and knew about for several operations where they were running drugs and guns, and that's how they were getting big accounts overseas for themselves and for the operations that they were conducting without the knowledge of Congress. And I think it was in the Cult of Intelligence, the book that was written, one of the first whistleblower books written about the CIA. Uh, uh, Pegged them for taking investments by CIA employees in the credit union and using that to fund operations without Congress's knowledge. So these guys are getting rich. They're getting villas over in Sweden. They're stocking up their bank, and that all goes with their personal conception of themselves as being the ultimate intellect.